The Galactic Academy of Zeltra was a marvel of the universe, its ivory spires stretched into the atmosphere, glimmering against the violet skies of the moon-inside species. From every corner of the galaxy, gathered in vast lecture halls, exchanging knowledge that spanned millennia, yet despite the Academy's focus on open-mindedness, there were certain universal truths no one dared challenge. Among them was the impossibility of surviving a Class V hostile planet. Professor Vraxel, one of the Academy's most respected instructors, was an authority on survival theory. A Shracton by birth, a species evolved in the swamps of Zarconia, where danger lurked in every corner. His 6 arms gestured animatedly as he addressed a full auditorium of students, his words carrying the weight of decades of research. Class V hostile planets, Vraxel intoned, his compound eyes scanning the room, are defined by their absolute incompatibility with life. These planets lack the resources necessary to sustain even the simplest organisms. Among these, the Raxis IV stands as the ultimate example. A hologram flickered to life, displaying a barren desert world. The planet's surface was a sea of golden sand, interrupted only by jagged rock formations. The hologram zoomed in to show blistering winds tearing across the terrain, creating sandstorms that obscured everything in their path. The Raxis IV Vraxel continued as a planet where daytime temperatures exceed 70 degrees Celsius, where water has not been found in over 3 centuries of exploration, and where sandstorms occur daily. No species, not even the adaptable polyxenites or the amphibious Gelthraki, has survived for more than 48 hours on this planet. It is without question uninhabitable. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Students from dozens of species whispered to one another, exchanging theories or nodding in agreement. Vraxel's lectures were famous for their rigor, and few dared challenge his conclusions. That was until a single hand rose from the back of the room. It belonged to Maya Carter, the only human in the class. She was shorter than most of her peers, her tan skin and dark curls setting her apart from the glittering scales, bioluminescent skin, and armored carapaces of her classmates. Despite her small stature, her voice carried a confidence that demanded attention. "Professor Vraxel," she began, her tone respectful but firm, "I don't think your analysis accounts for human adaptability." The room fell silent. Vraxel's antennae twitched in mild irritation, a subtle sign of his annoyance. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, "human adaptability is indeed impressive, but it is not infinite. The Raxis IV is a planet designed by nature to defeat even the most advanced survival strategies." Maya leaned forward in her seat. "Humans have survived extreme deserts on Earth for thousands of years. We didn't have advanced technology back then, just simple tools. And our wits, I think we'd stand a chance on Raxis IV." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Though it wasn't malicious, the idea of a lone human surviving such a hostile environment seemed absurd to many of her classmates. Vraxel, however, didn't laugh. Instead, his mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "A bold claim, Miss Carter," he said, tilting his head, "but I assure you the deserts of Earth are a far cry from the merciless environment of the Raxis, for even your species' impressive ingenuity has limits." Maya didn't back down. "Respectfully, Professor, I think you're underestimating what humans can do when faced with impossible odds." Vraxel's compound eyes narrowed. His kind rarely displayed emotion openly, but there was a spark of intrigue in his gaze. "You believe humans could survive the Raxis IV with nothing but primitive tools?" Maya nodded. "I do." The professor's mandibles clicked again, this time louder. "Very well," he said, his voice rising so the entire room could hear. "Let us test your theory." The murmurs in the room grew louder as Vraxel approached the hologram. With a wave of his hand, the display shifted to show the vast, empty deserts of the Raxis IV in greater detail. He turned back to Maya, his voice firm but not unkind. "I propose a challenge, Miss Carter. You will have 1 galactic week, 7 days on Raxis IV. You may take one primitive tool of your choosing. If you can find water and survive, I will concede that humans are more adaptable than I thought. If not," he trailed off, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Maya's heart pounded. She knew this was a gamble, but the opportunity to prove humanity's resilience on a galactic stage was too important to pass up. "I accept," she said, her voice steady. The room erupted in noise. Some students cheered, impressed by her bravery. Others whispered doubts, certain she was making a fatal mistake. Maya ignored them, her focus entirely on Vraxel. "Good," the professor said, nodding. "You will depart in 2 days. Prepare yourself." The next 48 hours passed in a blur. Maya spent every waking moment researching Raxis for studying maps and consulting Earth's history of desert survival. She pored over tales of ancient nomads who traversed the Sahara, the Atacama, and other hostile environments with little more than their instincts and rudimentary tools from her research. She selected her single allowed tool, an iron digging stick, a replica of those used by early humans to extract water from beneath the ground. Troll, one of Maya's closest friends, and a cephalon with shimmering translucent skin, visited her in the Academy's preparation bay the morning of her departure. Maya, he said, his voice tinged with worry, "You don't have to do this. Vraxel is just trying to make a point if you fail." "I won't fail," Maya interrupted, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her nerves. "Humans don't give up. When the odds are against us, we adapt, we survive." Troll sighed, but he didn't argue further. "Just be careful," he said, his voice soft. When the time came, Maya boarded the transport ship alone. Her classmates watched from the observation deck, their expressions ranging from admiration to pity. The ship's engines roared to life, and soon she was hurtling through space toward the Raxis for the barren desert world that would decide her fate. As the ship descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, Maya gazed out the window at the endless expanse of sand and rock below. The sunlight was harsh even through the tinted glass, and the heat radiating from the surface was almost palpable. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, "Landing in 2 minutes. Good luck down there." Maya tightened her grip on the iron stick. "Thanks," she said, though she wasn't sure if the pilot could hear her. The ship landed with a jarring thud, and the hatch hissed open. Maya stepped out onto the scorching sand, the wind immediately whipping her face and filling her mouth with grit. She shielded her eyes and surveyed her surroundings. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of golden dunes under a merciless sun. Behind her, the ship's engines roared to life again. She turned to watch it lift off, leaving her alone on the planet's surface. The sound of the engines faded, replaced by the howling wind. Maya took a deep breath, adjusted the cloth she'd wrapped around her face, and began walking. The challenge had begun. The heat hit Maya like a physical force the moment the transport ship disappeared into the sky. The full weight of her decision settled on her shoulders. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a barren expanse of shimmering sand and jagged rocks. The horizon was distorted by waves of heat, and the wind, though constant, carried no relief, only the sting of coarse sand. Her first instinct was to start moving. She knew that standing still in the open sun would only hasten dehydration, so she slung her pack over her shoulder and began walking. The iron digging stick, her sole chosen tool, rested against her shoulder. The metal quickly grew warm in the oppressive heat, but she did not let go. It would be her lifeline. Maya had prepared as much as she could in the short time she had been given. She had memorized the basic topography of the Raxis IV from old colony records and studied Earth's ancient desert survival techniques. But no amount of research could fully prepare her for the reality of this place. The heat was oppressive, and the endless expanse of dunes played tricks on her eyes, creating phantom oases in the distance. Her strategy was simple: search for depressions in the terrain, areas where water might once have pooled and seeped underground. From what she had read, the Raxis IV had been home to vast oceans millions of years ago, and it was possible that traces of water remained deep beneath the surface. The task was monumental, but humans had done more with less. By midday, Maya was drenched in sweat, and her small canteen of water felt dangerously light. She had rationed, carefully taking only the smallest sips to keep her throat from drying out completely, but she could not deny the growing weakness in her limbs. The sun beat down on her mercilessly, and she wrapped her face and arms with the cloth she had brought to protect herself from burns. The landscape offered little hope. Dunes rose and fell in endless waves, each one identical to the last. Rocks jutted out of the sand like jagged teeth, but there were no signs of plant life, no indication of moisture. Still, Maya pressed on, refusing to let despair take hold. "Humans are adaptable," she whispered to herself, the words a mantra: "We survive." As the sun began its descent, the temperature dropped slightly, offering a sliver of relief. Maya knew that nights on Raxis IV could be just as deadly as the days, with temperatures plummeting to near freezing. She needed to find shelter before darkness fell. After hours of searching, she spotted a rocky outcropping in the distance. It was not much, but it would provide some protection from the wind and cold, summoning the last of her strength. She trudged toward it, her boots sinking into the loose sand with every step. The outcropping was a cluster of weathered stones, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of relentless wind. Maya dropped her pack and began clearing a small area beneath the largest rock, using her digging stick to scoop away sand and create a shallow depression. It was not much, but it would serve as a makeshift shelter for the night. She sat down, her body aching and her throat dry. Her canteen was nearly empty, and she knew she could not afford to drink more than a few drops. As she gazed at the darkening horizon, doubts crept into her mind. What if Raxis was right? What if this planet was truly uninhabitable, and she had doomed herself to die in a barren wasteland? Shaking her head, she pushed the thoughts away. There was no room for doubt. Not here, not now. Survival depended on action, not fear. The second day began with the howling of the wind. Maya woke. Before sunrise, the air still bitterly cold. Her muscles ached, and her skin was raw from the constant abrasion of sand. But she forced herself to her feet, knowing that time was not on her side. As the sun rose, she continued her search. She scanned the terrain for signs of depressions or vegetation, anything that might indicate the presence of underground water. Hours passed with no success, and her exhaustion grew. Her lips were cracked, and her vision blurred from dehydration. Around midday, she noticed something unusual, a cluster of withered shrubs partially buried in the sand. They were dry and brittle, but their presence gave her hope. Plants like these often grew near water sources, their roots reaching deep into the ground. Maya knelt beside the shrubs and began digging with the iron stick. The sand shifted constantly, filling the hole almost as quickly as she could clear it. Her hands blistered and her arms ached, but she did not stop. With each stroke of the digging stick, she felt closer to her goal. The sun was high in the sky when she finally hit something solid. Her stick struck a layer of compacted clay, and her heart leaped. Clay was a promising sign. It often formed in areas where water had once pooled. Summoning her remaining strength, she continued digging, breaking through the clay layer. Inch by inch, the work was grueling, and every movement sent waves of pain through her body. But as the day wore on, she noticed the sand beneath the clay becoming damp. Tears filled her eyes as she touched the moist sand. It was not much, but it was proof that water existed on Raxis. For using a piece of cloth from her pack, she fashioned a crude filter and began extracting the moisture drop by precious drop. It was slow and painstaking work, but the first few drops of water that touched her lips felt like a miracle. The third day was no easier, but Maya's spirits were buoyed by her discovery. She continued to extract water from the damp sand, rationing it carefully. It was not enough to thrive, but it was enough to survive. She spent the day expanding the hole, hoping to uncover a larger reservoir. The process was slow, and her body protested with every movement. But she refused to stop. The knowledge that she had found water, a resource everyone else believed to be non-existent, gave her the strength to keep going. As the sun set on her third day, Maya sat by her makeshift well, staring at the horizon. The desert was vast and unyielding, but she had proven that it was not invincible. Humans, with their stubbornness and ingenuity, could endure even the harshest environments. She took a small sip of water, her hands trembling from exhaustion. "We survive," she whispered to herself, the words a quiet declaration of victory. For the first time since she had arrived on Raxis, for she allowed herself a moment of pride. She was not finished, yet there were still 4 days to go, but she had already accomplished what no one else had thought possible. The challenge was not over, but Maya knew one thing for certain. She had proven that humanity's resilience was stronger than even the harshest desert planet. The 4th day on Raxis IV dawned with the same unforgiving intensity as the others. Maya's body ached from head to toe, her muscles sore from relentless digging, and her skin cracked from the sun and wind. Sleep had been brief and fitful, interrupted by the whistling gusts of sand that crept into every crevice of her makeshift shelter. But as the sun rose higher, she pushed herself to her feet, her determination as unyielding as the desert around her. The water she had extracted from the damp sand was barely enough to stave off dehydration, and she knew she needed to find a more reliable source of the faint dampness. She had uncovered the day before hinted at the possibility of an underground reservoir, and that was where she pinned her hopes. Using her iron digging stick, she expanded the small well she had started. The compacted clay layer beneath the surface was tough and uncooperative, each strike of the stick sending jolts through her weary arms. Yet Maya persisted. Every grain of damp sand she unearthed felt like a small victory, and she clung to those victories like lifelines. By midday, her efforts were rewarded. As she cleared more clay, she struck a thin, silty vein of water. Trickling through the ground, it was far from a stream, but it was enough to pool into the shallow depression she had created using her cloth filter. She painstakingly collected the liquid into her small container drop by precious drop. Her relief was immeasurable. For the first time since landing, she felt a flicker of hope. If she could sustain herself for a few more days, she might survive the full duration of Raxil's challenge, and more importantly, she could prove to him and the rest of the Galactic Academy that humans were capable of adapting to even the harshest environments. By the 5th day, Maya began to notice patterns in the landscape. The wind-carved dunes were not as random as they first appeared. They followed the path of the prevailing winds, creating natural channels that collected debris among the scattered rocks. In sand, she spotted small patches of desiccated plant material. She realized that the plants she had found earlier were not isolated occurrences. They were part of a fragile ecosystem, one that relied on the faintest traces of moisture. To survive, these plants were hardy, their roots stretching deep into the ground in search of water. If they could find it, so could she. With renewed purpose, Maya began to track the clusters of plants. Following their sparse distribution across the desert, she noted that they often grew near depressions or along the edges of rock formations, areas where rain, if it ever fell, might collect. Her search led her to a shallow basin surrounded by jagged stones. The ground here was different, darker, and more compacted than the loose sand she had been trudging through. Maya knelt down and began digging, her movements slower and more deliberate as fatigue weighed heavily on her. The work was grueling, but by sunset she struck another pocket of damp sand. This time the moisture was more abundant, soaking her hands. As she dug deeper, using her cloth filter, she collected as much water as she could, storing it carefully in her container. As she sat by her makeshift well, staring at the faint light of the setting sun, Maya allowed herself a moment of reflection. The desert had tried to break her through its unrelenting heat, its biting winds, and its sheer emptiness, but she had refused to give in. "We survived," she whispered to herself, the words a mantra that had carried her through each grueling day. The 6th day brought new challenges. The temperature fluctuated wildly, with the midday sun burning hotter than ever, and the nights growing colder. Maya's body was nearing its limits. Her hands were blistered from the constant digging, her lips cracked and bleeding despite the small sips of water she allowed herself. Yet despite her exhaustion, she continued to explore. Her instincts told her there was more to discover on this planet, that the water she had found so far was just the beginning. Late in the afternoon, she stumbled upon a series of jagged rock formations that jutted out of the sand. Like ancient ruins, the rocks were covered in strange grooves and hollows carved by centuries of wind erosion. As Maya examined them, she noticed something peculiar, a faint line of green moss clinging to the shaded side of one of the stones. Her heart raced. Moss needed water to grow, even if only a minimal amount. If it could survive here, then there was likely a hidden source nearby. Maya scanned the area, searching for clues. The rocks formed a natural channel sloping downward into a narrow crevice partially buried in sand. She began digging at the base of the crevice, her movements frantic despite her exhaustion. The sand here was looser, easier to move, and she made quick progress. After nearly an hour of work, she uncovered a small underground cavity. Inside, she found a thin pool of water, no more than a few inches deep, but clear and undeniably real. Maya's hands trembled as she dipped her cloth filter into the pool, drawing out the precious liquid. She drank slowly, savoring each sip. It was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the scorching heat above. For the first time since she had arrived on Raxis, for she felt something other than desperation, she felt triumph. As the final day dawned, Maya prepared herself for the last stretch of the challenge. Her body was battered, her mind weary, but she had found a rhythm in the chaos. The desert no longer felt like an alien enemy. It was a puzzle she was slowly learning to solve. She spent the day reinforcing her small water wells, marking them with stones so they could be found again. She gathered what little plant material she could find, storing it in her pack as proof of the planet's hidden life. When the sun began to set, she climbed to the top of a nearby dune and gazed out at the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast, unyielding expanse of gold and red. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, a reminder of the resilience of life and the power of determination. As the transport ship descended to retrieve her, Maya stood tall, her digging stick resting against her shoulder. She had survived 7 days on Raxis, for proving not only the adaptability of humans, but their indomitable spirit. When the ship's hatch opened, Professor Vraxel was the first to greet her. His compound eyes flickered with something akin to respect as he surveyed her weathered appearance and the small but undeniable evidence of her success. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "it seems I underestimated you." Maya smiled, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Humans adapt, we survive." As she boarded the ship and left the desert world behind, Maya knew she had done more than complete a challenge. She had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of even in the face of impossible odds. The ship's interior was a stark contrast to the unforgiving desert Maya had just left. Cool, recycled air greeted her as she stepped aboard, and the faint hum of advanced machinery thrummed beneath her boots. For a moment her body sagged with relief, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to her. Professor Vraxel studied her silently as she handed over her digging stick and the small container of water. She had painstakingly gathered his antennae, twitched his multifaceted eyes, analyzing every detail of her appearance, the cracked lips, sunburned skin, and blistered hands. "You have endured," he said at last, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "But endurance alone is not enough to change the laws of survival. The desert remains unconquerable. Whatever meager water you found will not sustain life for long." Maya met his gaze, her shoulders squared. "Despite her exhaustion, you are wrong. The desert is harsh, yes, but it is not unconquerable. There is life there, plants, moss, and even water. You dismiss this planet as barren, but I have proven otherwise. The key is not brute force, it is adaptation." Vraxel tilted his head, his expression inscrutable. "Adaptation is a word your species wields like a banner, but what you discovered is merely a fraction of what it would take to colonize such a world. Your survival does not change the desert's hostility." Maya allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "Maybe not yet, but humans do not give up because something seems impossible. We take what we learn and build on it. You have seen what one person with a primitive tool can do. Imagine what a team could accomplish with the right technology." The transport ship returned to the Galactic Academy in less than half the time it had taken to deliver her to the Raxis. For Maya spent most of the journey in silence, her body resting, but her mind racing. She replayed the past 7 days over and over, analyzing every decision she had made, every hardship she had faced. Her discoveries felt monumental, yet she knew they would be met with skepticism. The Galactic Academy was a place of cold logic governed by a species that often viewed humans as reckless optimists. Vraxel's challenge had been designed to prove humanity's limits, not its potential. When they landed at the Academy, a crowd had already gathered. News of Maya's survival had spread, and the atmosphere buzzed with curiosity and doubt. Representatives from dozens of species filled the hall, their alien features reflecting a spectrum of emotions: skepticism, curiosity, and even admiration. Maya stepped forward, carrying her digging stick and the small container of water. As if they were trophies, the murmurs in the room quieted as she began to speak. 7 days ago, I was dropped onto Raxis IV with nothing but this," she said, holding up the iron stick. "I was told it was impossible for any species to survive there. I was told there was no water, no life, and no hope. But what I found was different. I found signs of an ecosystem, plants, moss, and water buried beneath the surface. I found proof that this desert, though harsh, is not lifeless." The crowd shifted, whispers rippling through the assembly. Maya let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. "Humans have a saying," she said, "necessity is the mother of invention. We do not thrive because conditions are ideal. We thrive because they are not. We adapt, we learn, and we innovate. The Raxis IV may not be hospitable now, but it has potential, and potential is all humanity needs." As she finished speaking, Vraxel stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. His compound eyes flickered as he addressed the crowd. "Miss Carter's survival is a testament to her species' resilience," he said, "but resilience alone is not enough to justify the colonization of a hostile world. Her findings, while intriguing, do not change the fundamental nature of the Raxis, for it remains an inhospitable desert, and the effort required to make it livable would be astronomical." Maya squared her shoulders, her voice steady, as she replied, "Every world that has been colonized was inhospitable. At some point, Earth was not always kind to its first settlers, yet humans adapted and thrived. You say the effort would be astronomical, but I say it is worth it what I found on Raxis, for it was not just water, it was hope, and hope is what drives progress." The room fell silent as Vraxel considered her words. For a long moment, No one spoke. Then a voice broke the silence. "I agree with the human." All eyes turned toward the speaker, a tall, serpentine alien with iridescent scales our own species, faced extinction on our homeworld. Before we learned to harness its resources, Miss Carter's findings may be small, but they are significant. Perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss the potential of this planet or her species. One by one, others began to voice their support. The murmurs of doubt were replaced by a growing chorus of agreement. Maya stood silently, her heart pounding, as she realized the tide was turning. Over the following weeks, Maya's discoveries sparked a flurry of activity at the Academy. Scientists from multiple species analyzed the data she had collected, confirming the presence of underground water, and traces of an ancient ecosystem. Plans were drawn up to send exploratory teams to the Raxis IV, equipped with advanced tools and technology, to uncover more about the planet's hidden potential. Maya was hailed as a pioneer. Though she downplayed the accolades for her, the mission had never been about personal glory. It had been about proving a point that no challenge was insurmountable if approached with ingenuity and determination. Vraxel, though initially resistant, eventually admitted to being impressed. One day, as they crossed paths in the Academy's halls, he stopped her. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone uncharacteristically warm, "you have given me much to reconsider. I still believe your species is overly optimistic, but perhaps that optimism has its place in the galaxy. You have earned my respect." Maya smiled, her voice steady. "Thank you, Professor. But it was not optimism that got me through those 7 days. It was determination." Vraxel nodded, his antennae twitching in what might have been approval. "Determination? Then perhaps that is the true strength of your kind." Years later, Maya stood on the bridge of a massive terraforming vessel orbiting Raxis, for the planet below looked much the same as it had during her first visit, an endless expanse of sand and rock. But now the surface was dotted with human and alien teams working together to unlock the desert's secrets. Through her efforts, the Raxis IV had become a symbol of cooperation and possibility. It was no longer seen as a barren wasteland, but as a challenge worth undertaking. As she gazed at the planet below, Maya thought back to her first days in the desert. The harsh sun, the biting winds, and the relentless doubt had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but she had emerged stronger, carrying with her the proof that even the most unyielding environments could be conquered with resolve and ingenuity. "Humans adapt," she whispered to herself, the words a quiet echo of the mantra that had carried her through those 7 days, "and we survive." With a final glance at the planet, she turned back to her crew, ready to face the next challenge head on.